This is the man from Modesto. Recently I made a few videos about what I see as a Russian plan and a groundwork to set up so that they can themselves commit an act of bioterrorism and then blame the Americans for it. And I also said in those videos that really we have to see past the national level and understand that it is Satanists who are orchestrating these scenes. Now, what I'm going to share with you now are 11 dreams about gas attacks or chemical warfare, biological and chemical warfare that I have seen over the years. And I'm just going to do these rapid fire because I know that people want to know what God is saying, and that time is valuable, especially as we're moving into these times. It seems like the works of the enemy are accelerating and approaching more and more rapidly, something the Holy Spirit showed me years ago would happen. So here it is. I'm just going to condense these so that I can get to you as much information in a short time as I can get to you. So here, the first one, this was a vision. It took place in Australia. A bunch of men who worked for the government went out and they distributed chemical weapons themselves. And then they all came into a safe place where they were supposed to hide out for some amount of time. I think it might have been 2 or 3 months. Like they were supposed to hide out in this place so that if anyone had seen them around these places, time would pan out. This is what they were told. These agents were told. Many of them were wearing suits and ties. Some were not, but most of them were. And they came into this bunker. It was concrete lined, and it was filled with all kinds of great food. There were television there, movies. They had a pool table, cognac, cigars, anything you could kind of want. Champagne, they had everything. Well, so it turns out they come in there and everyone has successfully deployed their vials or canisters or whatever it was they had. I think it was a spray. I don't remember exactly, but I think they were spraying something and they had all been successful and they had all returned. But then after some time, it turns out that 2 of the men some guy comes on a big screen television, talks and says, well, it turns out that 2 of the men were exposed, and so now all of you are exposed, and I'm sorry to say, but you all will die, but we're still asking you to stay in this container. I know that you'd like to speak to your loved ones, but that won't be possible. And so these men just break out the cognac and cigars. They accept that they're going to die. So whatever it was that they were spraying was deadly, and they all fully expected to die. So they were just living it up with the supplies they had. I thought about this for years, and later, I think this is probably the truth, that maybe those men were never exposed. Maybe the room was set up for them so that it was contaminated, and when they came in, they died. And this is something the Holy Spirit showed me years ago that I think I made a video on it. It's called People Who Work for the Satanic Plan Are Used and Then Eliminated. So now the next one, and I think this might have been part of that same vision, but there's a whole track that follows this young rock climber. His name is Dan Amonton. I was able to get, I'm pretty sure, sometimes I get a name like in the prophecy about Japan, Korea, China war. I knew there was this guy who had a 4-letter name and I couldn't remember what it was, and then when it came out, the guy's name was Mott. So I remember there were 2 letters in the last name that were the same consonants, right? So, but this is Dan Amonton. Like I woke up, I was like, wrote it down, Dan Amonton, because it seemed really important. So this guy, Dan Amonton, he's a rock climber, and he's a kind of a guy who likes to climb in groups. And so there are a bunch of young men. They organize groups with each other to go out and climb in different places in Australia. And a group of these boys has come to the house of this one kid, and he's really, really sick. He's in the bed. He's got a white sheet up to here, and he's just sweating. He's just sweating profusely. And his friends are asking, well, when you get better, do you think you can come? He's like, no. Like, well, who are you climbing with recently? Who else might be sick? And he's like, oh, I was out with Dan Amonton. And then as these kids are getting ready to leave, the dad, because this young boy still lives with his familial home. His father's in the house. There's also a small child. I don't know who it belongs to. And the dad gets the call, and he tells them all to stop, don't leave. And he says, Dan Amonton is dead. So Dan Amonton was this other climber. I didn't see him in the dream, but this young man had died from whatever sickness he had. And that was somehow associated with whatever these Australian agents in the previous vision I just showed you, I just related to you, had been spraying. So it somehow begins to kill people. So the next dream is from October of 2008. And in this dream, again, I have a video somewhere on YouTube about this. And what happens is there's some huge, I see this little building and there's an owl sitting on the corner. I understand this owl to represent the Satanists who worship at Bohemian Grove, who control many seats in the American government, and of course in other governments as well. But the owl represents these people, the kind of Illuminati, Bilderberger, Satanist type of folk, right? The elite bankers and so on and so forth. So this owl is sitting there, and then I see this huge cloud come up from behind this building, and it just says gas in it. The cloud rises up really huge. It's kind of a yellowish color, and just says gas. And then I see after some time, this owl is gone, and then I see a German army marching through this scenery. The Germans are going to play an interesting part in World War I, World War II. The first, second, and third heads of the leopard came out. Because before World War I and World War II, there was a first head of the leopard in which a German rose up and tried to conquer everybody around him. Then came World War I, then came World War II. So we're still waiting for that fourth head of the leopard to come about. And I see this German army march on. In some of these other visions, I'm going to get back to the Germans. So the Germans, I believe, are mostly going to stay out of this war, but secretly they're going to be supporting nations that are coming against the United States to destroy her. So in this next scene, I believe it took place in Eastern Europe because the type of camouflage that they used, it looked very similar to what I see around Eastern Europe. And when I was in the Middle East, Eastern European allied nations, their camouflage tend to look more like that. But I was never able to specifically locate that, and I don't remember what it looked like anymore. But these people were building some kind of a masonry block building, which again, typical construction of Eastern Europe. And it's a man and a woman, and they have gas masks with them. But at some point, the man is working near the house, and the woman has walked to get a block, and suddenly she just falls to her knees and falls over, and the man sees her, and there's this moment, and you can see it in his face. He wants to go and grab her and try to help her, but he also realizes he needs to get his own gas mask. Now, at this time, there's only a light wind. There's barely any wind at all, and this man runs, and his gas mask is inside, and he can't climb over the short amount of wall they built, and he dies. He just gets inside, doesn't reach his mask, and he dies. That's how quickly. So this would be, I suspect, a nerve agent in order for it to kill so rapidly. So next vision. This one is a very strange vision, and it didn't make any sense to me at all until I later learned about genetic biological weapons. They are now designing weapons, and I've heard this specifically in relation to China, bioweapons which can target certain genes that belong to certain ethnicities. So you could kill, for example, the Caucasians and leave Asian people alive. So in this dream, there's a big sickness going on, and as I'm walking, I walk through this kind of, it's almost cubicle in shape like it was a room, but it's out in the open, and I just walk through it, and it's like I'm going to say it's like a plasma or something. You can walk right through it. It's not really there, but it is. It's like a cloud, and floating in this cloud are different turtles, like large swimming turtles. You know, they're about this big of size, these turtles, and then there are different other objects suspended in this as if it was a jello. But I walk through it without any real problem. And when I come out the other side, so this cloud I think represents something else, but I've always felt like the turtles are interesting somehow, that somehow maybe these turtles are related to the cure. Maybe there's an enzyme, a protein that specific to turtles that will help cure whatever this sickness is killing. I don't know, totally guessing here. So I come out the other side, and on the other side, I find that there are a lot of men have died, but there remain a large number of women. So there are a lot of women left alive and only a few men. And later, when I was in the Middle East, I was laughing really loud, and a friend of mine who was also an activated National Guardsman, he looked at my teeth. He said, "Hey, are you of Asian descent?" And I said, "No, I'm Portuguese." But you see, on my mother's side, I have names that are typical of Middle Eastern areas. So could I be Asian? Absolutely. He said, "Well, your teeth are scooped teeth, and this type of teeth." And he looked at my teeth, you know, kind of stuff that soldiers do when nothing's going on, right? So he looks at my teeth, he's like, "Oh, you're definitely of Asian descent." He said, "You have Asian ancestry somewhere." So now this kind of putting that vision and this little data point together kind of makes me think that yes, a weapon which kills all non-Asians might be deployed in this wartime. Again, a guess, not a word from the Lord. But the vision about the people dying and the turtle and the weird plasma field, all of that was an actual vision. Next, this was a vision in which there still remained an area that Americans controlled kind of between the Sierra Nevada mountains and open plains going to the east. And the enemy was making a big last push, And these loudspeakers, which were set up in numerous places, were warning everybody, we are going to nuke this area. You must evacuate. Trains are running. You have to make it to the train stations, and the trains are running every 15 minutes. I forget the exact schedule, but they were giving times. Like, you must make these trains. And so this one particular family made it. The scene kind of follows this family with a man and a woman and 2 sons. And they make it to this last train station. And there's something about this family where they have one good son and one kind of a bad son. And some guy covered in boils because he's been hit by nuclear weapons makes it to this station and tries to kill them. And the bad son lays down his life to save this family as they're escaping. So, and in this vision, they were warning the people. They were naming what kinds of chemical weapons they were going to deploy, and they were called B3, B4, and another weapon which was called Freeze. And as they talked about this weapon, Freeze, in the vision, I understood that Freeze was some kind of a weapon that Muslim fighters specifically. So in this vision, there's a Muslim army. There's a large contingency of Muslims who are involved in this final push to overrun the last bastions of free Americans on the North American continent. So, and apparently also there are still some aircraft flying at this point. So even though people talk about there will be a loss of air power, that the enemy will have air superiority in the beginning of this war, apparently that flips somewhere in the middle, because these people are able to run aircraft and drop biochemical weapons on the enemy. But this weapon called Freeze, whatever it does, and I think it actually freezes people solid. I don't know if I imagined it or if it was part of the vision, but a man just freezes solid, like Medusa hits somebody in a movie or something, and the guy, and it's instant death. But for some reason, Muslims in particular are very afraid, and when they know it's being deployed, they won't stop, but they will slow down their advance. So it's an effective weapon for the Americans, but for some reason it's also limited. They can't get an unlimited supply of that. So end of that one. Next, this was sometime after 2003 because I recognized someone I was deployed with in one of these field cots in a field tent in a field hospital. And what has happened is they all have these burning eyes. And it doesn't kill people, it's treatable, but part of the treatment requires the person to lay very, very still and receive regular, constant, periodic treatment. I think they're putting like cold compress on their eyes or some other things, I don't know. But their eyes are all bloodshot red, and I go to one of these field tents to visit these soldiers, some of whom I know, and just to spend time with them and hold their hands and give them some comfort and something just to help them pass the time while they ride this out. But somehow the body is able to heal itself. But these chemical weapons have been deployed against them by Iranians. And also, while I'm in this tent, I asked them, I said, you know, back in the States, no one is telling us what's happening, but I believe, because God showed me, that the Iranians are actually in the field fighting against American soldiers, and that it's them who's doing this. And this soldier tells me, yes, that's true, that's correct. We engaged Iranians in the field. So somewhere at some point, the Iranians, instead of, see, this is the thing, the Iranians are proxies. They use other proxies. They are now funding jihadists in Iraq and Afghanistan to go out and kill Americans. They pay bounties, $500 for a soldier, $10,000 for a Marine or an interpreter. They send rockets to Palestine so they can fire these on the Jews. The Iranians themselves are financed by Russia, are supported by Russia, both in their biological warfare programs and financially. And the Russians, where do they get their money? Well, they get it from the globalists. The America sent a bunch of money over there after the fake collapse of the Soviet Union. And who else supports them? And Russia is also supported by the artificial inflation of the dollar price per barrel of oil. Putin is not such a great leader. He got a lot of money because he went out and forced the owners of oil wells to sign them over to him, sign them over to Moscow government, and now they're using that money. The global elite, so in the end, the point is that it's not really Russia doing this, it's not really Iran doing this, it's not really the Palestinians, it's not Iraqi jihadis doing this kind of thing, killing Americans. Who it really is, it's the global Satanists I call them the SSS, the Secret Society Satanists. And that's who's behind all of these works. And when you pray, you need to pray more against the Satanists, less against the Russians, less against the Iraqis. Pray for the people to be saved. Our war is not against flesh and blood, but against powers, demonic powers, and principalities. The demons have kingdoms and fiefdoms and authority over certain regions and activities, and we need to pray against those things. For example, there's a spirit of suicide, and it might rise up and gain strength in an area, especially if there's a satanic cult or animal sacrifice, blood sacrifice going on in that area. So these are the kind of ways we need to pray. Again, all of these visions are not to make you afraid or to help you to escape something or just to prepare. They're for that also possibly, but also that we can pray against them, that they will be reduced, that they will be ineffective, that people will be prepared, these kinds of things. So next, in this one, there's some kind of a military group, and they managed to capture somehow a group of terrorists, and they have them bottled up in this little home. And as the guard is changing hands, the morning team is calling out to, or maybe it's the nighttime crew, are making a call back to headquarters and say, no, we've got everything under control, it's all good here. And the other commander says, no, tell them you need 50 more men because this is an important situation. Well, while this conversation is going on, the guys inside blow up their bombs and it releases this huge cloud of gas, and the gas rolls out the windows and under the door and immediately kills the immediate guard sentry. The guards who were leaving just begin to run through the forest. The cloud is coming after them. Everywhere it passes, the squirrels and the birds just drop to the forest floor, and these men just run and run and run all through the night. So this is a very deadly gas, whatever it was, and some kind of terrorist act released that. Next, this is from May 2nd, 2009. I made a 7 Dream Vision compilation back then, and in the second part, which starts after about 1 minute, I talk about a vision from November 14th, 1995, and what happens is that somehow there's just disease saturating the air, and as a result, anarchy has taken place. There's a lot of panic, and in that dream, which to this day I don't remember it anymore, but it's what I was sharing then, it had started with children who received vaccines, and Hispanics also. So somehow the initial outbreak started in Hispanic communities and children. So these are targets. It was children who went to the public schools. So these are groups that they might target. So this might be released in maybe Hispanic neighborhoods, maybe in schools, maybe it's spread through vaccines. I'm not really sure, but in the dream, that was something that apparently I had noticed. Okay, next. This was a vision. I think I talked about this possibly in a video I made about martial law. And this is one of the later parts of a series of visions that I shared in that video. And for some reason, there are gas attacks, or at least gas fears, chemical. I think it's more like a biological threat. And there was an outbreak in an area, so people have to put on these whole suits, and then they have to walk, because there are no cars at this time apparently. People have to walk to these I guess it might be a UN peacekeeping force supposedly, but it's an occupying force, and you have to walk to these schools, and there you go into the school showers and they're decontaminating people. And there's also a lot of other strange stuff going on this, and I believe that this was because I heard someone else prophesy this, and right after I had heard that prophecy, I suddenly heard a rush of other things, and I believe that part of the vision that Daniel sealed up was that men would begin to worship one another. Men would begin to worship other men. Yeah, in fact, one of the, this is a kind of a synchronicity, but I believe it was God, because God can also use a piece of information that soon follows a previous similar vision or word or understanding, right, to confirm, to back up, or to fill out, to detail the other vision. So I heard somebody came on the radio and talked about this cult that was rising up where the people worshipped each other. So it was men worshiping men. So anyway, in this vision, after people were decontaminated, they were given an option to then worship the German people who had decontaminated them. And these German people all looked alike. They were different heights and ages, but they all looked alike. This really blonde hair, thin frame men, and there were also all kinds of I'm going to skip that. If you find that other video, I talked about it. So, in the next vision, this one takes place somewhere in America. And what happens is, so there's some kind of a journalist, and he has heard that there's a secret biology lab somewhere in this place, and he goes and he finds this kind of a building, and it's an interesting building because you only see about a half of a story above this field, and it looks like it's a wheat field. It's surrounded by growing wheat or just dried grass, and then there's like a walkway where if you walked along it, maybe your shoulders and your head would be above the ground, but still below the top of the grass. So, and that kind of surrounds these little buildings that protrude out. And then I believe there are also mini stores below the ground. So anyway, right by coincidence, right about the time that this journalist arrives to do his investigation, some alarms start going off. And so this guy's like, oh, something's going on. And so he runs in and he tries a bunch of doors, and he finds one that is open, and he goes in. And inside, everything is concrete, and it's mostly dark, and there are just a few lights in places. And he runs through and he sees a guy or a team of guys who are wearing these huge white suits, and they have these contraptions that just shoot out. It's like a long thing, and it has several nozzles on it. And when the guy pulls the handle, it shoots out flame. And this guy is burning all of the ceiling, all of the walls, and all of the floor very meticulously as he advances down. So this guy hides inside this little short hallway until those guys are gone. And then he explores this place, and then he leaves. So what has happened is that in this facility, they had an outbreak. So now this team was trying to purge it, but this journalist went in, and this is my guess, that the journalist got infected and then left with it. So now the next scene shows these Air Force teams are trying to contain it. There are people who have been contaminated, and this thing is very deadly. So these Air Force guys are being very, very careful. And they have these portable decontamination units that are split into two parts. On the one side, only the Air Force personnel are permitted, because this is their fail-safe. If something goes wrong in the first sealed room, which is supposed to be a safe room, so that they have procedures and protocols so that no virus is supposed to get into this first room. However, it does. While they're decontaminating people, trying to save lives, somehow the virus gets in there, and someone gets sick, or 2 or 3 people get sick and die in that room, so they fall back to the second room and they seal it off. So now they're no longer helping the civilians in the immediate area, they're only trying to save the lives of the trained specialists inside the room. But after a while, they have some food, they're passing the time, they're eating. They have some kind of beds that are more like cubicles, and one of these guys is up in these things, and after a while, suddenly he starts to get a little sick, and the other people move away from him. And in a very short amount of time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe less, his face just kind of dissolves and slides off, just exposing the bone. And that's how deadly and violent whatever this kind of a bacteria was. Now that scene ends, and it cuts to a third scene. And in the third scene, I see who I believe are people I met in 2011, maybe 2012. And they had 2 children. They had children who were light-skinned African Americans, and in this dream I see 2 boys who look just like them, who are light-skinned, and the older was a little darker, and they are coming to visit their father. Now this couple, we still know them, my wife and I, and they are still married. So maybe the father is working a different job somewhere else in another town, I don't know, but somehow they come to visit him, and they have a nice little meal, and the father has a nice car, and the son wants to drive it because he has just got his permit, or he just got his license or something, but he's learning to drive and he wants to drive it, and the father promises him that later on they'll be able to drive it. But around that time, you see some people running in the street because someone has become infected, or they heard some news of the infected, so this is spreading. But the age of the people in that dream, so the oldest son would be about that time of the outbreak, about 16. So he was the older boy was only about 3 when we knew them. Great children, really smart. And so 13 years from then would be about 2022, 2024, somewhere around there. So those are all the gas dreams that I had written down to share with you today. There may have been others I forgot. If you've had one, please share it in the comments, or make a video and post a reference to it in the comments. I will approve it. I want people to have the information that they need to know from God. And remember, these are not things to make you afraid, but these are things to inspire you to pray against them, to pray that people will be saved, to pray that salvation, that people, if somebody is going to be caught up in that sickness and lose their life, that they will be saved first. You know, whatever the Holy Spirit leads you, whatever your own wisdom that comes from God leads you to pray into, pray in that way. And remember, things can be defeated. It's possible that this whole accidental outbreak will never happen. We can just pray that that one journalist will never go in there, that somehow the hand of God will stop him and give him the wisdom to not go in, that the day before he goes, he'll run into a random Christian in the market, and that Christian will say to him, like, tomorrow you're going to want to go into a building. If you do, millions will die. Do not do it. You know, whatever. God and the Holy Spirit's coming over me so powerfully right now. Let's all pray. I'm gonna make it for myself. I'm gonna pray that that journalist will never go into that building. And that's one of the reasons that we're given visions, is not just to be like, well, I had a vision and to share it with everybody, but that we will be led into prayer. That we will be led into prayer because lives are at stake. We're coming into a time where the devil wants to kill everyone, and we need to pray. And we know that God is not going to permit that everyone will die. So we need to pray and pray and pray and listen for the Holy Spirit and adjust our prayer and listen for the Holy Spirit some more and adjust our prayer and go and seek the brethren that we know are hearing from the Lord and adjust our prayer some more. And we need to keep praying. As Ken Peters said, we need to continually stand in the gap. This is the man from Modesto reminding you, as always, to pray or be defeated. See, you hear those words? They have a meaning. And I received those words years ago from the Holy Spirit. End your video with these words: pray or be defeated.